There's a moment in every relationship when silence enters the room, not from peace, but from distance. And in that moment, your reaction will either deepen the gap or transform the space between you. Pause here. Take a breath with me. Because what you do when someone distances themselves, especially a man you care about, will shape not only the future of that connection, but more importantly, the shape of your inner world. Most people think love is built in closeness, but true love reveals itself in how we respond to separation. You see, the emotional gap someone creates when they pull away is not just about them. It's a mirror. A sacred mirror that reflects your level of self-trust, your discipline, and your spiritual clarity. When a man distances himself, what do? Do you panic? Do you perform? Do you beg for his return? Or do you pause? Do you turn inward? Do you choose stillness over reaction? Because here's the wisdom that most miss: his silence is not your cue to become louder. It is your opportunity to become deeper. Let us now walk through the journey, step by step, not just to understand what is happening, but to master who you become in the face of it. When a man begins to distance himself, something inside you stirs. It's almost primal. The tightening in your chest, the rush of thoughts, the urgent question echoing in your mind, what did I do wrong? The silence on his end feels loud. Loud enough to drown out your self-trust. Loud enough to awaken the part of you that craves resolution, connection, reassurance. And yet, this is the very moment you must learn to do the opposite of what your emotions are demanding. You must pause. But what does pausing truly mean? It is not passivity. It is not surrender. It is not giving up. The pause is an act of mastery, a quiet rebellion against reactivity. It is a conscious decision to not let someone else's emotional withdrawal become your internal chaos. The human nervous system is exquisitely sensitive. From a neurological standpoint, it is wired to seek safety in social connection. When that connection is disrupted, especially by someone you care about deeply, your limbic brain, specifically the amygdala, sounds the alarm. It interprets silence as a threat, and before you know it, your heart rate accelerates, your mind spins stories, and your body prepares to fight, flee, or fawn. All of this can happen in seconds. You may not even realize that your body has already decided to chase him emotionally before your logical brain even had a chance to weigh in. But here lies the quiet gift that few recognize. There's a space between stimulus and response. And in that space is your freedom. A woman once shared her story. She had been in a relationship with a man for 2 years. Deep emotional connection, shared dreams, and gentle laughter filled their time together, until one day, without warning, his messages slowed, his calls stopped, his presence faded like mist in the morning sun. She panicked. Every fiber of her being told her to act, call him repeatedly, ask what's wrong, drive to his home unannounced. But something inside her, a soft, whispering wisdom, told her wait. She sat with the discomfort. She breathed through the ache. She reminded herself that her worth was not hanging in the balance of his attention. 3 days later, he called. Not with excuses, but with tears. He had been overwhelmed, wrestling with family pressure, and was afraid to burden her. Her calm response, her space, holding, gave him something no one else in his life had: safety. And that safety brought him back, not just physically, but emotionally. The power of her pause changed everything. We live in a culture that glorifies speed. Swipe fast, text fast, fix fast. But the soul doesn't move that way. Emotional maturity is not about how quickly you respond, but how deeply you listen to yourself and to the silence that others sometimes leave behind. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the presence of awareness. When you pause instead of react, something profound happens. You stop outsourcing your peace. You stop letting someone else's emotional temperature dictate your internal climate. That man may be confused, afraid, emotionally unavailable, or simply processing something that has nothing to do with you. But if you immediately take his distance as a verdict on your value, you lose the one thing you most need in that moment: clarity. The pause gives you access to clarity. And clarity is the foundation of power in any relationship. A pause does not mean you abandon the connection. It means you return to the most important relationship of all, the one you have with yourself. What are you feeling? Where in your body are you holding tension? What story is your mind telling you about his distance? And most importantly, is that story true? This is not easy. It requires self-discipline. It requires emotional training. But think of the alternative: chasing, pleasing, over-explaining, begging. None of these behaviors have ever restored true intimacy. They only create emotional imbalance, where one person becomes the pursuer and the other the one being pursued. The energy becomes distorted, the connection strained. But when you pause, you allow space for the other to also feel, to miss, to reflect. You create a vacuum, yes, but one filled with integrity and quiet strength. And often, that vacuum becomes a mirror. If he sees a woman who does not beg, who does not panic, who does not lose her center, that reflection challenges him to rise, or, at the very least, reveals the truth of his emotional capacity. There's an ancient story from the East. A monk once stood by a riverbank. He watched as a scorpion fell into the water. Without hesitation, he reached out and pulled it to safety. But the scorpion stung him. The next day, the same thing happened. Again, the monk saved it. Again, he was stung. A young disciple, observing this, asked, "Why do you keep saving it if it keeps hurting you?" The monk replied, "Because the scorpion is doing what is in its nature, and I am doing what is in mine." The pause teaches you to respond from your nature, not from your wounds. When someone distances themselves, they may be acting from fear, confusion, or even selfishness. But your response should not be dictated by their nature. It should be chosen from yours, and your nature, your higher self, is calm. It is observant. It is not easily shaken. Modern psychology speaks of distress tolerance. It is the ability to sit with discomfort without needing to immediately eliminate it. People with high distress tolerance are more resilient, more emotionally intelligent, and far less likely to engage in self-sabotaging behaviors. The pause builds this capacity. Imagine this: you receive no message from him today. You notice the tension rising. Instead of reaching for your phone, you reach inward. You breathe. You place your hand on your heart. You whisper, "I am safe in myself." You sit with the ache, not because you enjoy it, but because you understand that fleeing discomfort leads to emotional dependency. And you're building something far greater than temporary relief. You're building inner strength. One of the greatest myths in relationships is this: if someone pulls away, you must pull them back. This mindset is based in fear. The fear of loss, the fear of being forgotten, the fear that you were never truly enough. But here's a deeper truth: someone's withdrawal is not always a reflection of your worth. Sometimes it is a test of their own capacity to handle closeness. And sometimes it is life's invitation for you to rise. Not to chase, but to choose differently. A young woman once wrote in her journal after a painful breakup, "I wanted him to fight for me, but what I really needed was to stop fighting myself." There is nothing wrong with wanting connection. It is deeply human, but when that desire overrides your peace, it becomes neediness. And neediness is not love, it's a cry for self-return. The pause brings you back to yourself, and in that return, something remarkable happens. You become radiant, your energy shifts, your thoughts become clearer, your body relaxes, And instead of asking, why is he pulling away? You start asking, what do I need to nourish myself today? Maybe it's journaling. Maybe it's a walk in nature. Maybe it's releasing old stories through tears. This self-directed energy not only restores your center, it communicates a frequency that others can feel, including him. There's a truth in energy dynamics that even neuroscience is beginning to affirm. People respond to your internal state more than your words. When your inner world is grounded, others feel it, even in silence. They may not know why, but they feel more safe around you, more drawn, more curious. And sometimes your grounded presence will do what 1,000 messages cannot: call him back. But even if he doesn't return, something far more powerful will: your self-respect, your peace, your wisdom. Every pause you take when you're tempted to react is a small act of liberation. It is the quiet, graceful defiance of the woman who refuses to abandon herself. This isn't about playing games. It's not about withholding or pretending to be unbothered. It's about learning to navigate emotional distance with grace, with self-awareness, with patience. Consider the mighty tree in the forest. Storms come, winds blow, branches sway, but the roots remain. This is your task, to grow roots that are deeper than the storms of another person's moods. Relationships will always carry moments of uncertainty. People will pull away. They will become inconsistent. Life will test your emotional boundaries, but your power is not in controlling them. Your power is in your response. Your breath, your calm, your inner pause. This is the beginning of true emotional alchemy, turning discomfort into clarity, reaction into reflection, fear into wisdom. So the next time he distances himself, do not ask, what can I do to make him come back? Ask, what is life inviting me to master within myself? And in the silence that follows, you may just hear the answer. Not from him, but from the still voice within you that has been waiting all along. There is a moment, often overlooked, that quietly reshapes the outcome of a relationship. It happens not in words, but in the shift of energy, when you let go, not with bitterness, but with understanding. When you release your grasp on needing someone to behave a certain way in order for you to feel whole. This is the discipline of detachment. Now, detachment is often misunderstood. People hear the word and associate it with coldness, with not caring, with walking away. But true detachment is none of these. It's not abandonment. It's not apathy. It's freedom. It's the inner freedom that arises when your peace no longer depends on how someone else chooses to show up or not show up. In relationships, this principle becomes a lifeline. When a man distances himself, your initial urge may be to hold tighter, to fix, to explain, to convince. And while those reactions are human, they are rooted in fear, not clarity. Detachment invites you into a new kind of power. The ability to love someone deeply while still remaining whole without their constant validation. Think of a bird in the palm of your hand. If you grip it too tightly, you harm it. If you open your hand completely, it may fly away. But if you hold it gently, respectfully, with a sense of freedom, it might choose to stay. This is what detachment looks like in love. It is loving someone with an open palm. There was a woman once who was deeply in love with a man who had a pattern of withdrawing emotionally. Every few weeks, he'd go quiet, not in anger, just in absence. She used to chase after him, sending long messages over, explaining her feelings, analyzing his every word. But each time she did, he withdrew further. Then one day, something shifted. She still loved him, but she stopped waiting at the door of his silence. Instead of reacting to his absence, she returned to herself. She nourished her own life, her friendships, her creativity, her self-reflection. When he reached out again, she welcomed him without punishment or neediness. He was surprised. Her energy had changed. She wasn't using him as her emotional anchor anymore. She had become her own anchor. And from that point forward, the dynamic between them transformed. When you detach in this way, you send a powerful message, not to manipulate, but to communicate. I am not dependent on your presence to validate my existence. That message, when embodied sincerely, either inspires someone to rise into deeper connection or reveals that they never intended to meet you there. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop controlling. And neuroscience supports this shift. When your brain is in a state of fear, fear of loss, fear of abandonment, it activates the sympathetic nervous system. You enter a stress response which clouds your ability to perceive clearly. But when you consciously let go of needing to control outcomes, you shift into the parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest state. In this state, your heart rate slows, your breathing deepens, and your thoughts regain coherence. This is why detachment often leads to unexpected healing, because it returns you to the clarity that fear had stolen from you. So how does one practice this detachment? It begins with small, consistent acts of inner alignment. When you feel the urge to check your phone for the 10th time, pause. When you're tempted to send that third message, breathe. When your mind spirals into stories about his silence, come back to your body, back to the now. This moment, this breath, this is where your true power lies. Emotional detachment is like training a muscle. At first, it shakes, but over time, it holds you upright. One of the most liberating truths in relationships is this: you cannot force someone to show up for you in the way you desire. But you can show up for yourself in every moment. And when you do, the energy you emit becomes magnetic. Not from effort, but from essence. This leads us to an even deeper layer, where energy begins to speak louder than your words. Everything in the universe is energy, including you. Your thoughts, your emotions, your intentions, they all carry a frequency. This frequency doesn't just stay within you, it radiates outward. People feel it, even if they can't articulate why they respond to it. When a man distances himself, he's not just hearing your words, he's feeling your vibration. You may say, I'm fine. But if your energy says, I'm desperate, he will feel that. You may try to act indifferent, but if your inner world is full of longing and anxiety, that dissonance will create tension. Energy doesn't lie. Think of a time when you walked into a room and immediately felt something was off. No one said anything. No one did anything. But you knew. This is the subtle language of energy, and it is always being spoken, especially in relationships. Now imagine this: a man begins to pull away. Instead of chasing, you return inward. You clean up your energy. You process your feelings. You grieve if you must. You reaffirm your self-worth. And when you do engage with him again, whether in words or simply in presence, you bring a different frequency. One that says, I am rooted. I am whole. I am not seeking to be rescued. This shift often creates a ripple effect. The other person may feel more safe, more open, more drawn to re-engage. Not because you manipulated them, but because your energy invited a different level of connection. There's a story of a woman who was deeply hurt when her partner suddenly became distant after months of closeness. She cried. She journaled. She wanted to call him and demand an explanation. But instead, she sat in silence one evening. She lit a candle, placed her hand on her heart, and said aloud, I release the need to be chosen. I choose myself. From that moment, her energy shifted. She started eating healthier, sleeping better, reconnecting with her art. Weeks passed. Then, one evening, she received a message from him. Not a generic hello, but a vulnerable admission. He'd been overwhelmed, ashamed, afraid. He had felt her pull back, but in that space, he realized what he truly missed wasn't just her presence, but her peace. This is the paradox. The more you seek to grip, the more things slip through your fingers. But when you become energetically aligned, grounded, accepting, present, you stop chasing what is meant to find you. Modern psychology refers to this phenomenon as self-regulation. When you manage your own emotional states, you create coherence in your body and mind. This coherence becomes a kind of silent invitation. Others may not even know why they feel drawn to you, but they do, because safety is magnetic, and emotional self-regulation creates safety. In the same way, dysregulation repels. If your emotional field is full of anxiety, neediness, unresolved wounds, you may unintentionally push people away, even if your intentions are loving. This is why doing the inner work is not just a personal act, it is an act of relational service. To regulate your emotional field is to respect the space between you and others. And sometimes the man who is distancing himself isn't doing so out of rejection, but confusion. He may be navigating his own fears, insecurities, or inner conflict. If you meet that with panic, you add more chaos. But if you meet it with calm, you become the stable ground he might need to find his way back. Let us not forget the story of the still lake. Two travelers once stood before a mountain lake. One threw a stone into it, creating ripples. The other simply watched the water until the surface became still. "Why did you not throw a stone?" the first asked. The second replied, "Because I wanted to see my reflection." A stillness allows for reflection. Your inner calm becomes a mirror in which others can see themselves more clearly. So if he is distant, ignore the urge to force clarity. Instead, become clarity. Let your energy say what your words cannot. Let your alignment speak louder than your confusion. And in that space, you begin to rewrite the pattern, not just in this relationship, but in all future ones. You become the woman who no longer begs for love, but embodies it. The woman who is not led by fear, but by frequency. The woman who knows that the greatest act of connection is not in seeking to be understood, but in learning to understand herself. This is not easy. It requires practice, repetition. Sometimes you will fall back into old habits. That's okay. The journey is not linear. But every time you return to your breath, every time you pause before reacting, every time you choose alignment over anxiety, you are training yourself to love from a place of power, not pain. And perhaps that is the real lesson when someone pulls away, not to chase their footsteps, but to deepen your roots. There will be more to understand, more layers to peel back. But in the quiet, in the stillness, in the frequency of your being, you have already begun. There is a kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books or long conversations. It comes from the silence between actions, from the space between words. And when someone distances themselves, when a man you care about suddenly becomes quiet or emotionally absent, it is not your loudest reaction that carries the message. It is your energy. Because whether we realize it or not, we are always communicating. Even in stillness, even in silence. Energy is the language before language. In moments when a man retreats into himself, you may be tempted to fill the silence with explanations, messages, attention-seeking behaviors. But the truth is, your internal frequency, the emotional energy you carry, has already spoken long before your words ever reach him. And the quality of that energy either invites connection or triggers withdrawal. If you are rooted, clear, and self-assured, your energy offers an invitation. It tells him, you are safe to come closer. But if you are frantic, insecure, or desperate, your energy sends an entirely different signal. I need you to make me feel whole again. That kind of frequency can become overwhelming. Not because your emotions are invalid, but because energy that comes from lack often pushes others away, even when your intention is to draw them nearer. There is a quiet power in tending to your internal world before reaching outward. In relationships, we often think of communication as what we say or how we say it, but communication begins long before that. It begins with how we feel, how we regulate our nervous system, how we embody our emotional states. When someone walks into a room and is deeply calm, others feel that. It doesn't have to be spoken. That person has coherence, and coherence creates trust. When your internal state becomes chaotic due to someone else's behavior, it's easy to forget that you still have control. Control over your breathing, your presence, your thoughts, and more importantly, control over the meaning you give to their behavior. A man may distance himself for 100 reasons that have nothing to do with your worth. He may be overwhelmed with work, struggling with emotional wounds, feeling confused about his own direction, or emotionally immature and unable to voice his needs. But if your immediate conclusion is, "There's something wrong with me," then you hand over your personal power. You reduce the situation to a narrative that doesn't serve your growth. This is where energy management becomes more than just a personal practice. It becomes relational wisdom. You can begin to shift your energetic field by first pausing, not rushing to conclusions, not assuming the worst, but taking a deep breath into your body and asking, "What am I feeling right now? Is this mine? Or am I absorbing someone else's confusion?" Your body is constantly feeding you information. Tension in the shoulders, butterflies in the stomach, a lump in the throat. These are not random sensations, they are signals. And when you become attuned to your own body, you become more discerning in your emotional responses. There's a woman I once met who told a powerful story. She was in a relationship where every time she started to get close to her partner, he would pull back, not dramatically, just enough to make her question herself. At first, she blamed herself. She thought she was being too intense, too expressive, so she began to tone herself down, walk on eggshells, minimize her needs. But no matter how much she adjusted, the distance remained. One day, instead of trying to fix it, she asked a different question. "What is my energy saying right now?" She realized that deep down, she was afraid of being too much, afraid of not being chosen, afraid of repeating past rejection. That fear, though unspoken, was pulsing in her energy, and it was that subtle fear that he was picking up on. So she decided to shift. She didn't say anything to him. She simply started tending to her emotional field. She meditated daily, practiced breathwork, wrote letters she never sent, gave herself the compassion she was craving from him. Within 2 weeks, his behavior changed. He didn't know what was different, but he started leaning in again. He started opening up. It wasn't because she convinced him. It was because she changed the signal. When your energy becomes calm, grounded, and non-attached, you become a sanctuary, not a storm. This doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It means transmuting them, transforming fear into self-reflection, turning need into presence, channeling pain into purpose. We often think we need others to validate us in order to feel whole. But the most powerful energy you can embody is this: I am enough. I am safe in myself. And I allow others the space to meet me or not meet me without losing myself in the process. This energy communicates trust, not just in the other person, but in life itself. Trust that if someone is meant for you, they will come closer. And if not, their distance is simply creating space for something greater to arrive. But that level of trust requires practice. It requires inner work. It requires becoming aware of your triggers, your emotional patterns, your attachment wounds. Because when a man distances himself, your unhealed stories will begin to speak. This always happens to me. I must not be lovable. He's going to leave just like the others. These thoughts aren't just thoughts. They are scripts, emotional memories stored in your nervous system. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake the present situation for a replay of the past. You'll project old pain onto new people. This is why awareness is everything. The moment you catch yourself spiraling into fear, pause. Place your hand over your heart. Breathe deeply. Speak gently to yourself. I am not abandoned. I am with me. This simple act of self-soothing rewires your brain. It calms your emotional centers and brings you back into presence. Because when you're present, you can respond instead of react. You can observe rather than assume. You can remain steady, even when someone else is uncertain. This leads us to another liberating truth. Rejection is not always rejection. Sometimes it is redirection. A man pulling away is not necessarily a door closing. It may be life opening another door. A door to self-respect, to deeper clarity, to more honest communication. It may be revealing to you a pattern that needs healing, a boundary that needs reinforcement, or an expectation that needs recalibration. There's a story of a young woman who was deeply in love with a man who ghosted her. One day he was fully present, calling, planning a future, expressing devotion, and the next he was gone. No explanation, just silence. She was devastated. For weeks, she blamed herself. She tried to piece together what she had said or done wrong, but no answer came. Instead of staying stuck, she began a process of inquiry. She wrote down every emotion she felt. She revisited her past relationships. She began therapy, not to win him back, but to understand why his disappearance shattered her so deeply. What she discovered changed her life. It wasn't just his silence that hurt. It was the unhealed abandonment she had carried since childhood. His exit had touched that old wound, and instead of tending to it, she had tried to fill it through external connection. Months later, the man resurfaced. This time, she didn't respond from the old version of herself. She listened to his explanation, and without bitterness, she let him go. Not from spite, but from strength. She had outgrown the version of herself that needed his validation. His distance had been the doorway to her own healing. What felt like rejection was, in truth, redirection. When someone creates space, that space is not empty. It is fertile. It is a mirror. It shows you what still needs attention within. It gives you the opportunity to rebuild your inner foundation so that future connections are rooted in strength, not survival. And it is in this sacred space that you get to choose your story. You can tell yourself the story of being left, or you can tell yourself the story of being led back to yourself, back to your worth, back to the wisdom that was waiting beneath the noise. Because the truth is, when a man distances himself, he may or may not return. That is not within your control. But what is within your control is how you rise, how you respond, how you alchemize the pain into power. You are not here to beg for closeness. You are here to embody closeness with yourself. You are here to become so grounded in your own presence that others must meet you there or fall away. This does not make you hard. It makes you clear. And clarity in love is more valuable than charm, more lasting than chemistry, more essential than fantasy. So when someone pulls away, pause, regulate your energy, reframe the story, return to yourself. This is how you shift from reaction to response, from fear to wisdom, from needing someone to complete you, to realizing you were never incomplete to begin with. The path ahead will require continued awareness. Not every emotion will make sense at first. Not every interaction will lead to closure. But as you learn to listen, not just to others, but to yourself, you will begin to live in alignment with the most powerful truth of all. You are your own sanctuary, and no one can take that away. A woman who truly begins to understand her power knows that solitude is not a punishment. It is a privilege. This awareness emerges gradually, often after trials that test her patience, her loyalty, and her sense of worth. She has walked through the storms of disappointment, where love felt one-sided and presence felt like absence. But instead of allowing the emptiness to consume her, she learns to sit with it. She becomes a student of her own heart. This is not the loneliness people fear. It is solitude, the sacred space where healing, clarity, and personal evolution begin. There's a profound difference between being alone and being lonely. Loneliness comes from being disconnected from yourself while being surrounded by others. Solitude, however, is the courage to be connected to yourself even in the absence of others. Many women who choose to live alone eventually come to understand this truth. They begin to view their space not as a void needing to be filled, but as fertile ground where their voice, identity, and vision can grow without interruption. It's in solitude that a woman first learns to listen, not to others, but to the silent language of her own body, her own intuition. The world often teaches women to be accommodating, to stretch themselves for the comfort of others, to shrink their needs to keep the peace. But in solitude, all of that noise fades. She begins to ask herself, what do I truly want? The answer doesn't come immediately, but she feels it rising slowly from somewhere deep inside, like water breaking through dry earth. This clarity makes her strong, but not in the way society usually defines strength. It's not the loud, aggressive type of strength that demands attention. No, it's quiet, refined strength, the kind that allows her to sit in her own silence without needing validation. The kind that enables her to walk into a crowded room alone and still feel complete. The kind that says, I am not waiting to be chosen. I have already chosen myself. Take, for instance, a woman named Lena. After 10 years in a marriage where she constantly compromised her desires to maintain the relationship, she finally found the courage to walk away. The world whispered that she would regret it, that she was too old to start over, that good men were few and far between. But Lena didn't listen. For the first time in her life, she chose peace over partnership, self-respect over obligation. The first few months were filled with echoes of doubt, but slowly, her home began to feel like a sanctuary. She painted her walls with colors she loved, lit candles that reminded her of her childhood, started dancing in the kitchen to old jazz records. She wasn't just surviving, she was rediscovering herself. This kind of rediscovery is powerful because it's not rooted in reaction. It's not about proving a point or seeking revenge. It's about rebirth. The woman who learns to enjoy her own company is no longer driven by the fear of abandonment. She doesn't see relationships as something to complete her, but as something to complement her already full life. When she eventually does love again, it will be different. She won't tolerate crumbs while pretending it's a feast. She won't justify someone's poor behavior with her empathy. She'll look into the eyes of the person across from her and silently ask, "Can you meet me where I already am?" If the answer is no, she'll walk away, not out of anger, but from clarity, because she has learned that it is far better to be alone with peace than together in chaos. This clarity also extends to friendships. A woman who has been alone learns that not every connection deserves her energy. She becomes selective, not out of arrogance, but from awareness. She knows the difference between those who are curious and those who are committed. She no longer seeks quantity, but quality. One deeply connected friendship means more than 100 surface-level acquaintances. The woman who has walked through solitude has no time for pretense. She craves realness, honesty, and depth. There's a story often told in quiet circles. A woman spent years climbing the corporate ladder, always surrounded by people, but never feeling seen. After burning out, she took a sabbatical and moved to a small cottage near the sea. At first, the silence was unbearable. But over time, the waves spoke to her in ways that words never could. She began writing poetry, not for fame, but for herself. The act of writing became sacred. She returned to her life months later, not as the same woman who had left, but as someone entirely new, calmer, wiser, and deeply rooted. She had learned in her silence what the noise of success had hidden. And this is the paradox: the woman who chooses to be alone becomes the one everyone seeks, not because she is hard to get, but because she is hard to forget. She walks differently, speaks differently. Her presence is soft yet powerful, like water, gentle enough to nurture life, yet strong enough to carve through stone. She does not beg for love, but invites it, not from desperation, but from wholeness. She dresses for herself, eats alone without shame, travels with confidence, and embraces the unknown. While others chase after fleeting pleasures and temporary company, she is building something enduring within herself. This does not mean she is immune to desire or that she does not long for companionship. It means her longing no longer stems from lack, but from abundance. And that changes everything. A powerful woman is not necessarily the one who raises her voice, but the one who no longer lowers it. She speaks her truth not to offend, but to exist fully. She no longer plays small so that others feel big. She realizes that by shining her light, she gives others permission to do the same. And that light is not a spotlight demanding attention. It's a steady flame that lights her path and quietly warms those near her. She has stopped asking for permission. Permission to rest, to grieve, to say no, to walk away. She no longer needs someone else to validate her experience. Her pain is real, and so is her joy. Her tears are not signs of weakness, but signals that her heart is still open. And because she knows how to hold her own heart, she will never again hand it to someone who treats it carelessly. This level of self-respect, cultivated in solitude, eventually becomes a force that transforms every aspect of her life. She chooses jobs that align with her values, not just her skills. She protects her energy like a sacred resource. She surrounds herself with those who celebrate, not tolerate her. And most importantly, she becomes her own sanctuary, no longer waiting for someone else to save her, to choose her, to see her. She has already seen herself fully, completely, tenderly. And once a woman sees herself like that, there is no turning back. From this place of inner sovereignty emerges something even more profound. Discernment. Discernment isn't judgment. It is the ability to see clearly without distortion. She no longer confuses attention with affection, excitement with alignment, or intensity with intimacy. She recognizes red flags for what they are, not for what she hopes they might become. She no longer falls in love with potential. She looks for presence. She understands now that some people come to teach, others to test, and a few to treasure. But no one comes to complete her. She is already whole. And so, she loves from overflow, not emptiness. And when the right person arrives, someone whose soul speaks the same quiet language, who does not fear her depth but dives into it willingly, there will be no need for games, no masks, no performance. Just two people whole in themselves, choosing each other not out of need, but out of reverence. This is the woman who lives alone, not because she cannot find love, but because she has found something greater, herself. And now she walks the earth not searching, but radiating. A silent signal to the world that says, I am no longer available for anything that does not align with my soul. The world may not always understand her, but she understands herself, and that changes everything. When a woman reaches this place within, something mysterious happens. She begins to receive insights, not always loud, but subtle nudges that guide her forward. She learns to trust the pauses in life, the in-between moments. She no longer rushes healing or forces outcomes. She aligns with seasons, understanding that winter is as necessary as spring. She blooms in her own time. This blooming is not for show. It's not an act of rebellion. It's an act of remembering. She remembers who she was before the world told her who to be. And in doing so, she becomes someone entirely new. Not the old version of herself improved, but a deeper, truer expression of her essence. And this essence is magnetic, not because she tries to attract, but because she's finally stopped trying. Let the world be loud. Let people wonder why she is so calm in the chaos. Let them ask why she smiles without reason, why she walks like she owns the earth. She does not explain anymore. She simply lives, fully, deeply, authentically. Because now she knows solitude is not the absence of love. It is the space where love begins, not outside, but within. When a woman begins to understand her value, not from a place of pride or ego, but from a deep and sacred awareness of her worth, everything in her world starts to shift. She stops waiting for validation from people who never intended to give it. She no longer pleads for space in rooms where her presence is treated as optional. She ceases to beg for love that's measured, inconsistent, or used as a tool for control. Instead, she walks with a quiet strength that says, I know who I am, I know what I bring, and I will not shrink myself to fit into places I've outgrown. Such a woman becomes untouchable, not because she doesn't feel, but because she's learned not to settle for less than what aligns with her truth. Her standards are no longer dictated by fear of loneliness, but by clarity of purpose. Her boundaries aren't walls to keep love out, but gates that filter what is worthy of coming in. This kind of transformation doesn't happen overnight. It is often born from pain, through heartbreaks, disappointments, betrayals, and nights spent in silent prayers no one hears. But through those moments, she becomes refined, not hardened, but wiser, not cold, but more discerning. And that discernment becomes her protection. She learns that being misunderstood is not a curse, but sometimes a form of divine protection. She understands that silence is not weakness, but a powerful form of strength. She stops chasing closure from people who broke her, because she realizes that their inability to love her was never about her lack, but their own limitation. In relationships, she no longer asks, will he choose me? But does this connection honor the woman I've become? She becomes deeply rooted in herself, and from that place of rootedness, she attracts not just a man, but a mirror, a partner who sees her, respects her, and values the depth she offers. In this quiet revolution of self-return, she becomes the woman she once prayed to be. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but whole. And in a world that often profits from her insecurities, her wholeness becomes an act of rebellion. Her peace becomes power, her solitude becomes sacred, and her presence becomes a blessing to those wise enough to recognize it. She doesn't need to prove herself anymore. Her life speaks for her. Her energy enters rooms before she does. And for those who see her, truly see her, she is unforgettable. Not because she tried to be, but because she dared to be fully, unapologetically herself.